Welcome to another podcast episode with us here at Arcana, where we try and talk about all things user experience, interop, in conjunction with everything that's happening in the Web3 space. Today is really exciting because we have two very, very senior people from the DeFi space in general. And we're going to be talking to them about how user experience is in the DeFi space and what can we do to make it better, what's missing and what's coming. So first and foremost, we have Melon here who leads DeFi at Linea. Welcome, Melon.
Hey everyone, thanks a lot for having us.
And of course, we have Barna, who's the co-founder at Malda, which is one of the dexes on Linea. Hey Barna, how are you doing?
Hey guys, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having us here.
All right, fantastic. I can see that there are some people joining in, but what we'll do is let's just start with introductions, quick introductions of each of you guys, and then we'll kind of dive into the session here today. So, Barna, you want to kick things off for us here?
Sure thing. Yeah. Hi everyone. So I'm Barna. I'm one of the co-founders of Malda, which is the first of many things. It's the first unified liquidity lending protocol. It's the first protocol fully building in the zkVM, internalizing zk, and it's the first ZFi protocol to be launched very soon. We just conducted our testnet. Thank you for everyone who potentially participated. We had 1.5 million plus transactions. I don't know the metrics. Pretty proud of the team on that. I suspect it's one of the biggest testnets ever behind an application.
Fantastic. Those are indeed great numbers, and congratulations. Yeah, Melon, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Milan. I lead DeFi for Linea, and Linea is a zk VM that's been incubated by Consensus, and we're very proud to have Malda build on us and on our testnet and break our testnet because it was that popular of a testnet campaign they had. So very bullish. Testnet are made to be broken. So it's very nice to see that level of activity here.
All right, great. No, fantastic. I think let's start things off slightly broad, and we'll just talk about the L2 landscape in general and why Malta chose to build on Linea. And but first, of course, Naren, if you can help us understand what's the thesis behind Linea in general. I know you already explained that it's a zkVM, but what is it that you guys want to become, and how is it going to be a different experience from every other L2 that is out there?
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a lot of things that Linea is doing, and most of it has been very focused on building essentially the best technological stack. And so this is something that is less obvious to users, but we are first of all one of the few that is actually building in zkVM. You don't have that many building this. Most of the rollups right now, both in terms of user count and TVL, are optimistic rollups. So we are one of the few that is still building into the zkVM. We firmly believe in that, and we believe in that for many reasons. But it gives us ability to decentralize that is very dear to our values. It gives us fast settlement, which is also very important, and it at the end of the day, it becomes the most aligned way to scale. And it enables quite interesting use cases when you have a very fast provable finality. You end up with very interesting use cases in a multi-chain world. You end up being a very efficient hub chain, or essentially a counting chain. And these are topics that we would be talking more throughout this call. But basically, it makes the chain very efficient for applications like Malda that are building out in the open for multiple chains for a fully abstracted experience. It makes it quite a good chain where all of the accounting is done and where all of the information flows through.
Got it. Great. Thanks for that. Barna, maybe you can help sort of like get the audience to understand better by giving your own example of why you guys chose to build on Linear. What's different here? If you could share those insights, it'd be great.
Yeah, that's a very good question as well. I obviously have been building on Linear for 2 years now, so pretty long time. We have been here since Linear broke Gurley, and now we chose to replicate that and break Linear Sequoia and mainnet Sequoia a little bit. Not alone, of course, but we had a lot of transactions there. So like originally, like we came mainly because of the approach to ecosystem support. That was a core message on Linear's side on how they will start interacting with the ecosystem. They had like a high ecosystem focus, also the focus to answer all the messages from anyone, be it a small protocol, be it a couple of developers trying to build something, or obviously like everyone answers when large blue chip protocols answer. But they chose a different route, and they chose a route of focusing on trying to foster a vibrant ecosystem of builders joining the space. And they were also always focused on scaling Ethereum, actually, and not just necessarily like what's best for Linear, but what's also good for Ethereum. And then I guess the answer is like we stayed because we met like a bunch of people within the Linear team that we became also like very close to, and we are very aligned in value proposition approach to building. And the reason that we maintained in the Mulder design Linear as the host chain is not just the obvious reason that we were already here and we just stay sort of loyal, but we also did the building of Mulder very diligently. So we did consider what kind of other designs could you have where maybe you don't store the ledger on Linear, and what are the pros and what are the cons and what are the drawbacks. So we very quickly realized that while we are able to integrate optimistic rollups, if we would store the ledger on an optimistic rollup, that would cause large latency overheads and very low certainty of finality for a period of time. So it's the optimistic rollups like reach very good finality once the state has been posted on L1, which takes like 1 minute to 5 minutes usually. But before that, they don't reach a very strong finality before that. So then we started considering if we can use Ethereum mainnet or ZK rollups. And Ethereum mainnet would be an obvious choice if you are building a unified liquidity for Ethereum, like just from the architectural point of view, to have everything stored on Ethereum mainnet. But the main drawback we realized there is that all of the extension chain interactions have to go through the host chain that we use. And that is not a sufficient solution because you are going to have very highly priced transactions. Even now when mainnet has like pretty low gas fees, like for users, they don't want gas fees of $1 either. I remember how much complaints we had on Linear when the gas fees were that high initially in the old days from users. They were comparing it to optimistic rollups. Now it's cheaper than optimistic rollups. So then we moved on to zero knowledge rollups. And we specifically were looking more for a ZK EVM as the protocol logic was already written in EVM, and we wanted to use EVM as the anchor for the state. So the landing protocol ledger would be written in EVM, which removed a couple of other options. And then Linear is obviously the biggest zero knowledge EVM. So that was quite an obvious choice at the end. But I just like to have like logic and reasoning behind every decision. But I also value, of course, relationships because those are very important for technical support. And yeah, continuously we receive very detailed answers to any of our questions because we are diving very deeply into the Linear design to manage many of our user ops in the more complicated ZK backend.
No, great. It's indeed like a refreshing sort of like story where in a day and age where you have protocols and projects literally jumping ship every few months, trying to move from one platform to the other, either because they're in search for the right kind of support, or people are just grant hunting and grant farming and things like that. It's very refreshing to see that you guys have been building here for the past 2 years, and you started out because it felt right, but you stayed obviously for all of the technological benefits that Linea had to offer outside of course, their support, which we can vouch for as Arcana as well, is that it really doesn't matter whether you're the biggest protocol in the space or just a ragtag group of developers trying to do something. Uh, the Linea guys always respond, and there is someone on your group who's always going to be available to answer your questions, or at least take your questions and forward it to the right people. So this is, I can 100% vouch for this. So it's also very nice to hear that you guys start building there, and 2 years in, you're basically breaking test nets still on the same chain that you began on. So that's really refreshing, really nice to hear. All right, so if we can now sort of like move on into some of like the more core subjects of today's discussion. Maybe Barna, we'll start with you. We know that you have a bit of a time limit here today. Can you speak about like the importance of user experience in the DeFi context for Malta, and what is it that you guys have sort of done so far in order to kind of make the lives of users much more easier? What is different here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. Like I think like the UX is quite an important topic, just in the space in generally, and there are a lot of things that can be solved. So my perspective is we have like a bunch of tools that we can use to solve many problems and build actually products that serve actual users behind it. But a lot of the discussion as I see it are like going more towards like, oh, we need this and now we need that. Okay, this is not going to work, but in 3 years we are going to have this. That's not really my perspective. That was not the perspective with Moida. We started building with what is available, and those are the zero knowledge proofs that are already here and mature and cheap to solve the UX issue on the Ethereum ecosystem side. So I think nobody really envisioned layer 2 scaling like the way it is right now, and that is definitely not the long-term end goal. So the main issues here is that when you are using a different layer 2, you are using a different chain fully. Your wallet is on a different chain, your balance is on a different chain. You cannot use your balance from, let's say, Arbitrum only now. And right now we saw that there are a couple of like these cluster solutions, which I think is still like trying to go for that winner takes all approach, which is, again, I don't think it's like in the spirit of Ethereum scaling. The spirit of Ethereum scaling was like free competition. We have like a bunch of competing different tech stacks that innovate and provide a better solution, and then we have scaled execution. And some of the tech stacks are going to solve one problem better, other tech stacks are going to solve another problem better. But obviously, I think like in this cluster solution, it's still trying to like do this like winner take all. Let's have like one cluster, everybody is going to use that, but that will decrease innovation in my opinion. So I think that's insufficient. And you have like 2, 3, 4 competing tech stacks that are pretty big, and they reached critical size. And I think like Linea already has critical size, like Arbitrum has critical size, Optimism has critical size, and let's say ZK Sync is it's looking like they are onboarding some institutionals that are going to be using their stack. So it's on the border, but I think it also reached critical size. And then Starknet has like a strong community, so probably Starknet is going to be around for a long time as well. So you are never going to have like a shared sequencer superchain design between these chains. You are going to have like within the clusters. So if you have interop like that, you are not really solving any problem. And the end goal should be that for the user, everything feels like one chain. You have very cheap execution, very cheap user operations, very good user experience, but it doesn't matter where the user's funds are really stored. And I don't really believe in end user bridging. I think nobody really does, except the protocols that are earning money on top of that. I believe in abstracted protocols where the protocol operates on multiple async environments, and then it is doing rebalancing and absorbing the order flow and then settling via the most secure bridging solution that they can possibly find, which would be, in my opinion, right now, like Intents or Berlin bridging for given assets, such as like USDC CCTP is probably like a very good way to settle at scale. And then if you scale up the bridging part, like if you have like large orders, then the composition of solvers is also going to change, and you are going to be able to settle these large volume transactions between rollup A and rollup B, and then you get to the point where the user would feel like that they are interacting with one chain. So that's what we try to solve. Our contracts are working Ethereum wide. What that means is that our extension chain contracts know what happens on Linea via the ZK proofs. We built a very fast centralized sequencer right now to handle all the order flow, to manage the protocol state. It's completely trustless because you need the zero knowledge proofs. So using a centralized sequencer design here is quite correct. And on the front end, we are looking to release our global accounts, which are abstracting away the chain balances from the user, but not just that, the execution, right? The biggest issue is like when you are trying to execute on one chain, but what if you want to try to execute from multiple chains? You need to solve this issue, because if the user needs to execute from each different chain, it's not an optimal UX. And then underlying, we are just rebalancing between the pools because we have the scale to submit like large orders, and Intent-based bridges have the scale to handle orders of like 500K, soon I think up to 1.5 million in one order between the different rollups.
Got it. Understood. I think you said a bunch of different, very interesting things there, but I'll try and come back to that as we dive into more detail. But Melon, if I had to ask you, essentially, you're leading DeFi. One of your core objectives will be to get as many DeFi protocols coming in and building on Linea. So, and obviously, one of the core things for anyone building any sort of like DeFi is the question of essentially like TVL, and will there be enough users with enough funds to be able to interact with these DeFi protocols and make things happen? How are you seeing being able to kind of make this landscape within Linea as big as possible and attract as many people as possible?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, first of all, I think utilization or volume would be a more interesting metric than TVL when we talk to DeFi, and especially in the case of Malta when we talk about lending markets, because it's fairly easy to have a large TVL. It's just a cost, really. But it's fairly easy. What's interesting about mature DeFi ecosystem is sustained utilization, sustained volume, and what I think is interesting when you make the UX better to the point where really you're just using Malta. It's not on Linea, it's not on Base, it's not on Arbitrum. It doesn't really matter. You're just using Malta. You get a few benefits, which is that as a user, you get liquidity regardless, and you get the best liquidity because you get the aggregate liquidity of every chain, and then each chain having its own essentially liquidity profile, liquidity providers, and specialties. Some chains are heavier on the stablecoin, some chains are heavier on the Ethereum and its derivatives. By using a system like Malta and by going essentially multi-chain, you become able to tap into all of these liquidity sources, and you bring volume, you bring utilization, and so what you end up creating is just a more efficient market, and that's the whole point, and that's the whole reason why we are doing this. Is really we just want more utilized, more volume, more efficient market, more so than we want more TVL. TVL will come if volume arrives. The risk that main chain have is to have a lot of TVL and zero volume.
Understood. So the way the Malda's approach is something that you guys also specifically like, and it's something that you're hoping like others will also follow suit within like the DeFi ecosystem of Linea in general. You think that's the way
Yeah,
forward?
yeah. So there's two things interesting about Malta and lending market in general, and even in DeFi is that we start to see that DeFi is infrastructure and lending market even more. So it's it's not necessarily something that a lot of users use, but it's something that a lot of users rely upon directly or indirectly. And so we see a lot of dApps essentially separating the the interface or the UI depending on who they care for. Because if you look at lending markets in general, you will see a few very well capitalized liquidity providers interacting and representing most of the volume, and then you will see a lot of very diverse low capitalized users or addresses using those. And so you can see you really have two types of users. And so the more we make the UX better and the more we improve on chain abstraction and account abstraction and all of this, the closer we can go to building essentially um, something that would serve the same purpose as neobanks and have the same level of UX as neobanks, while the core, a bit hard to use DeFi ecosystem would be used by more well capitalized users. So we start to see a difference in how we treat UX depending on who is using it. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And lending markets and DeFi in general, being that very infrastructural component of the ecosystem, it's going to be interesting to see which way it evolves. But one thing is for sure is that for it to evolve and to onboard more users, the UX is going to have to be way better. And so that's what Malda is doing. And like Barna, if you want to talk about that part in general, but it's
I think that's a very good point, and I think we need to touch upon that. I think we can also consider many things that Malan said. So I think on one aspect we need to also see that like some of those well capitalized users are only on Ethereum mainnet right now, and they're not gaining exposure to some volume on layer 2s. So I definitely think Malta solves that. But you also mentioned two things. First thing is like DeFi neobanks, and I also look at traditional banks, and I sort of see like it's like this eating into each other's pie. So the neobanks are still like not really mature, and they are eating into TradFi banks, and they are gaining market share on top of them. But I think soon we are going to see DeFi starting to eat into neobank market share as well. So that's also a dynamic that I have been observing. And then the second aspect you mentioned is that you do want to create an interface, but I would just like say just like UX specifically for a given user and based on what their actual use case is. And I really like that because I do think that on lending protocol side, just how like interest is distributed, I think we have a little bit lagged behind in innovation compared to like some of the innovations that we are doing on decentralized exchanges side with concentrated liquidity. So I think lending protocols need to be able to handle much more computation, especially if you start comparing it with like a neobank and traditional finance. So the way that neobanks started to compete with traditional finance is that they started to use much more complex algos, AI and ML behind the scenes, so in the backend. And DeFi cannot really start eating into this pie until we have like a pretty straightforward interest rate curve, and if we are trying to do all the computations on chain. So in my perspective, to move forward, every single DeFi piece needs to internalize ZK proofs and needs to start building into ZK VM, and that's what I see as well. Like what I hear is that all the major protocols right now realize this, and everyone is looking to integrate the zkVM. On our side, we of course want to leverage that we started this journey last year. We started this journey earlier, and we have built out more capabilities in the previous time, and we are going to continue to leverage that as a competitive advantage. But regardless of how the market ends up, this is definitely the way forward. But all this complexity, of course, you need to also bring in account abstraction. I really see that as like a very, very key piece that has been underutilized so far within the space and externally as well. So you need to provide the user experience where they don't even realize the crypto rails behind it. But if you want to stay mission focused, and if you want to stay regulatory compliant, right, maybe a better reason for many builders than being mission focused, what is the ethos of Web3 and DeFi, you want to stay regulatory compliant. So if you are building this sort of neobank in a fully self-custodial manner, so if the underlying accounts might look like Web2 accounts, they might have like very Web2 like authentications, but they are self-custodial because they are relying on ERC-437, then that is quite good for you because you will not need to think about, with a fully decentralized protocol, about regulatory compliance. You won't need to get a banking license that neobanks struggled so much with, and you can approach everything much easier, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think both of you made some very important points. I think the one that really stuck with me is essentially, instead of making like a taking a very generalized approach, interfaces ought to kind of figure out who they are catering to and then accordingly tailor sort of like the user experience. But I think some of the things can be fairly generalized in terms of like problems that exist and solutions for them. Perhaps solutions can be probably multiple approaches, like Bana, you were talking about earlier, how we shouldn't look for like a winner take all, should allow for innovation. Many people should be able to propose different kinds of solutions, and then the market sort of decides who wins out. So some of these sort of like problems that have basically plagued like adoption and generally things like DeFi has probably not suffered as much as probably every other uh, uh, vertical within the Web3 space, primarily because there is very clear intent and motivation to be able to kind of, which is of course to try and make more money with my money within DeFi. But I think one of those big problems that we can clearly outline is essentially, I think Bhavna, you touched upon this earlier, is the interop problem, and how basically I'm today sitting with my MetaMask account right now with funds spread across multiple places because I've been trying out different apps and I've been bridging and moving funds from one place to another, getting small amounts of ETH on every chain. I have a bunch of USDC, USDT on every chain, and now I'm left with this almost Frankenstein-esque sort of like MetaMask account, which now if I had to do something within on any chain, on any app, it's going to be a big problem for me, because then I'd have to find a way to consolidate all of this, which is going to really take a lot of time, and I'm just going to say I'm going to do that later. What is your guys' take in general on this interop problem, given that Ethereum has very clearly said execution on L2s, we're going to have a bunch of L2s, every L2 is going to try and differentiate with each other. And now with this modular sort of thesis going forward and being played out, and everyone is getting their fair share of users, mindshare, TVL, liquidity, etc. How do you think this gets solved? Are you guys like been following like stuff that has been happening, and what is your guys' take? Either of you can take this first.
Yeah, I like this question. I definitely want to take it before I need to jump. So I want to just start first off with like DeFi hasn't really suffered as much because there are always people who try to make money. So in my opinion, DeFi in itself it has zero value, or not zero value, but close to zero value. So I really think that the other verticals, be it Web3 social, which wasn't able to find product market fit, is really needed for DeFi to become big. all those other adoption verticals, I think they are very important for DeFi. And I think the lack of adoption also led to like some stagnation. I do see some stagnation within the DeFi ecosystem, as I think not necessarily everyone still believes on how exponential growth is ahead of the DeFi protocols, and they are a little bit more focused on the right here, right now, and potentially value extraction. And that's my personal take on that. On the other hand, what you mentioned, modularity is like it's just like very important. So the way I see it, we have the Ethereum ecosystem. It sort of became fragmented, so it's now it's sort of different countries, and then you had the Solana ecosystem, which was like one single approach, very easy for users to understand and interact. So there is a fragmentation in the UX, which is bad, but there is also a fragmentation in liquidity and capital efficiency due to that also exists within the Ethereum ecosystem. So if we take a look at, I did run the numbers actually, because I was curious if you add up all the FDV of all the layer 2s that exist, you can just add up like the top 5, because everything else is becoming like very, very small and irrelevant. It's a fraction of Ethereum's FDV. It's a fraction of the value that Solana captured at the peak. So it doesn't really explain that layer 2s are extracting value, but that value is going nowhere. There is not much economic growth in terms of like security behind it, and was not that much growth on the DeFi ecosystem, on the application side within the Ethereum ecosystem. And I think that all boils down, if you have like lack of way for the capital to move between these rollups, then you are going to face stagnation, because the economic growth is going to be less. But if you have high interop, like where you don't even realize it's interop within the Ethereum ecosystem will for sure grow much more. And that is like an engine that is really needed for economic growth behind Ethereum. And that I don't know how like the cycle goes from here. I don't want to predict that, but that was, in my opinion, one of the key reasons why there was more growth in other ecosystems and not in the Ethereum ecosystem. So I think that's very important to solve, and that's the economic and financial part that it can solve.
Yeah, I think you also spoke about like how you guys have literally gone ahead and seen that there was this lack of interop, and you're like, we're not waiting for people to solve this. We are just going to go ahead and figure out a way around this, right? And this is the whole thesis of Malta, from whatever I've seen and understood. And but yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts. I do understand that you have to leave it, but it'd be really great if we can reconnect at some point again and talk about some more things DeFi, because I think you make very, very interesting points, and I think it's great that you have this very clear vision of what it is that you want to do and how things stand, and you have great opinions and insights. So we'd love to catch up with you again. Thank you, Barna.
Thank you very much.
Right?
And
Yeah.
I would also like to catch up again. Good composition here on this space. Until next time. Thanks.
Take care. Yeah, Milan, if I had to kind of, pose that same question to you, how do you think this gets solved? Are you seeing it getting solved? How do we kind of get this value that Barna was talking about to accrue to the Ethereum ecosystem?
Yeah, you really have I think two directions that you can go, and they are not mutually exclusive. You have application layer interoperability, so that is what Malta is building. That is also what you guys are building, which is essentially abstracting away the fact that each of these layer 2 is independent from an execution point of view and an environment point of view. And so you abstract that away. And so if we consider that you have the layer 1, the core EVM, then on top of that you have various layer 2s, and on top of that you have apps. One way to build is really to build apps that do not care, or a better word would be abstract away those different environments to benefit from asset on every chain, co-execute on many chain, and in your case, be a tool to abstract away the concept of chain to the user and just have it work. And another approach is also to increase and improve the interoperability between chain at the chain level. And I think both of these are needed, and both of these will be improved in the future. And it seems to me that the entry point of that abstraction is always going to be the app or the wallet, or essentially the end user focused side of the equation. But my understanding is that the more interoperability the chains have, the more tool and power you give to those apps and to those wallets to create a better UX for the users. Because at the end of the day, it's either the app or the wallet that is the UI entry point for most users. The chain should be abstracted away, and is already being abstracted away when you use Balda, when you use Arcana. So you have you already have that abstraction from the user side. Now, essentially, on our side, on the chain side, the more we allow for interoperability, and the more we improve on that front, the more tooling we give you to improve even further the UI. So that's why the UX. That's why I'm saying it's not really mutually exclusive. It's really you distribute. And create you create technology to abstract away the lacks and the things that are not here yet in our technology. And then when our technology improves, you distribute that technology and you make it accessible. So it's really just one journey with a few different players.
Got it. I think you said something very interesting there, and this is like, I have a personal thesis around this, and this is something that we at Arcana have been sort of building more and more confidence around this particular thesis. But I'd love to get your take. You talked about how, whether it's app level, chain level, essentially we're all probably moving to a place where, the entry point for the user, which is the app, is now the one that's going to shine, and it's going to be this thing that could probably be residing on, accessing liquidity on multiple chains through like a chain level sort of like interop, or basically giving this user like a multi-chain feel through an app level, basically abstraction. But we're definitely moving in that direction. But if you see historically what's happened, and this especially is true once the L2s came through, is that the way things have moved is that the chain forms the ecosystem. The chain is the one that attracts the user. The chain is the one that attracts the liquidity, which is then sort of used to kind of then attract applications, right? And that has sort of been like this way in which you do things, where now you go and tell, like, say, the Uniswaps or the Aves of the world, saying that, oh, there's so much usage and there's so much liquidity and there's so many users, and basically come and build on our chain and things like that. But now it seems to be moving where now I think this is where Linea will actually do very well, is because of your clear your outlook towards apps and being able to support them. What is your take on this shift where now chains have to differentiate, attract apps, and the apps will
Yeah.
attract?
Yeah, well, I think you said it yourself. So like, even though the chains have been the entities that foster the growth, and they do that because they usually are um, well capitalized, and they have the ability to support apps, etc. We are today in a world where Aave is older than most chains, and Aave is present on most chains. So it makes sense, and it is their plan for the future. If you look at what Aave v4 has in store, and this is like a longer term vision, but it makes sense for them to become the center and the entry point for the user, and to have a fully abstracted UX for their user. And you say, and this is what Malda is pioneering today. By the way, this is the same thing. They build in a very they build a similar idea using different technology than Aave, but they build a very similar idea. It's that idea that I just lend, I collateralize, I borrow. Chain is irrelevant, essentially. And so you say it has a more multi-chain feel. I would even say like the chain itself stops being relevant, which is very it's a very good thing. And it's, of course, like we are in the early stages still of DeFi, and of we're still talking about chain abstraction and interoperability. But if you look at the growth of, in general, technological advances, the internet was also like this. Like you had websites and applications that were hosted on some specific servers, data centers, and that used to be very important. But nowadays we don't really care if it's on AWS or Google Cloud or whatever. We just use an app, and that happens because you have a great level of interoperability between those subnetworks, the internet being a network of networks. And so when technologically we achieve a good level of interoperability, we should have a way more app-centric and user-centric and more UX-focused full user view of how DeFi evolves. And so the distribution will become much more important, and is already becoming much more important than the underlying chain itself.
Very interesting. It's very nice to hear that take from you regarding chains and how apps are going to shine and things like that. You're absolutely right also about how Aave has literally outlived everyone else. And kudos to them. And maybe there'll be 10, 20, 100 more Aaves in the future. But yeah, it's been great talking to you, Milan. We're pretty much at the end. But before we let you go, I'd love to kind of just ask you for, two things. One is, what is one thing that we should all look forward to from Linea through the course of the next year? So, what is that one thing at Linea? And what is that one sort of, like, I don't know, it could be a prediction, it could be a hot take that you have for the DeFi space for 2025?
On the linear side, I think you really, well, of course, you want to look forward to any technological advancement that we make, because every time we do a technological advancement, we improve and we allow for more use cases to exist. And so you want to look out for us becoming more and more aligned with Ethereum, supporting it even deeper, and essentially, realizing that vision that we all have and that right now is not fully there yet. DeFi in general, I'm very excited for DeFi to be distributed by more than just the app. So like, I'm going to take a few examples, but because this doesn't make sense what I just said, but you have Aave, you go on Aave, you use Aave, you borrow on Aave, you supply on Aave, you do everything on Aave. You do the same for Malda, you do the same for really any DeFi application. But I'm quite excited for apps that had nothing to do with crypto or DeFi to start using it. So like Revolut starting to just like provide lending that are in the back end DeFi powered, and like Revolut being a European neobank, but insert here your local neobank. But the same way we saw, in a way, the same way we saw Coinbase do lending using Morpho in the backend, and the user doesn't even know that they are on chain, but they are. I'm excited to see that continue and see that grow, and yeah, like see these be pushed towards more retail users. At Linea specifically, working with MetaMask, we have the MetaMask debit card, and that MetaMask debit card, because it's linked to your MetaMask account, really it's a debit card, but you add Malda to the mix and it becomes a credit card. And you add a different interface and it becomes a savings account. And so basically, we have finance, it is decentralized, we have payment. And so we are trying to essentially distribute DeFi in different ways than just using the DeFi interface, and to aggregate all of that and to create a better experience for the user.
That's great. Fantastic. I think I know what you're talking about. So sort of like what Revolut does in Europe, especially, is what you want to be able to see. So distribution vehicles that pack in a bunch of protocols and just make it easy for users. I think that's great. Thank you so much for spending the time here today. Would love to kind of come back to probably in a few months' time and catch up with you, the Malda guys, and everyone else. Try and see where we are with respect to like interop and user experience. Is it gotten better? Is the promise being delivered and things like that? So thank you so much for your time today, and look forward to speaking to you again, Melon.
Thank you so much for having us.
All right, that's the end of the stream here today. Thank you all for tuning